Every experiencer has to overcome ontological shock, and we have to do it while the world tells us we're crazy. Because of this, each of us has our own story, our own helpful perspective, our own set of tools. These are the stories we share in the Experiencer Workshop.
The last podcast that I did was a very interesting podcast, and I didn't know it getting into it, but the one podcast is called the Awaken Podcast, and at the last minute, he said, listen, I have somebody else that wants to join that is also very interested in the topic of targeted individuals. Would you be willing to have him on as well? And I'm like, yeah, I don't care. So come to find out that he also, the other person that he had on was also a podcaster that has a podcast called The Biblical Hitmen. And both of these guys are, I guess, what I would consider, I mean, they are Christian, but they're kind of like a liberal Christian. You know, they kind of are, I don't want to say into the mysticism of Christianity or Gnosticism, but they're interested in it. They're interested in uncovering a lot of biblical prophecy and then tying modern events into the book of Revelations and that sort of thing. And, so at first I was like, when I didn't know this, when it started. So like at first when I got into it, I was like, oh, am I going to get like, attacked grilled or something? Yeah. Am I going to get grilled or like argued with? But they were both very open-minded, and they were both very receptive to what it is that we go through. And it was very interesting to see the kind of mental turn of events especially in the one podcaster's mind, because he had actually disclosed, and it'll be out when it publishes, that every time he does a podcast, he gets attacked. He'll get choked. He goes through it as well.
Really?
Right? He doesn't hear the voices, but he even during the podcast, so I'd actually feel comfortable saying this, I think it was like a few weeks ago, he was just doing something random, and next thing you know, he's in his kitchen urinating on the kitchen floor. Just like a time jump. Exactly, like a possession, and all of us to embarrass him, like humiliate him, So, and of course, from like a Christian's perspective, it's like, I profess Christ. I'm going to church. I'm doing all the right things. I'm reading the Bible. I'm praying to Jesus. And I'm still under possession from the devil, according to that, so there's this there's this very dualistic dichotomy in this fight in this verses. And all it took was a very simple question on my end. And I said, let me ask you a question. When this happens to you, is your conviction in Christianity that much stronger? Like, is there a relief after you reach out to Christ and it kind of goes away? And he's like, oh, definitely. I said, well, there you go. I said, because I can say Buddhist mantras and it goes away, because that's where my conviction lies. We find like that truth is very, truth is, and this is kind of where you kind of get into like a little bit of confusion too, because we can say that truth is relative, but yet the very statement itself, truth is relative, sort of undermines the statement that truth is relative, because in order for truth to be relative, you have to say that there is one thing only that is truthful, and that is relativity. You know what I'm saying? So that statement alone kind of undermines itself and is very paradoxical. So then somebody would say, like a Christian would say, that truth is absolute. There is one truth, and that truth is, Jesus and, the Bible, and, very, that's a very fundamental Christian point of view. And I get both, and I empathize with both, and I respect and appreciate both. And I guess where I'm at with all of this now is it's not so much that, I do believe that truth is subjective. Okay. I guess is the best way for me to put it, is that truth is like intersubjective, meaning you have a truth and I have a truth. It would be like you and I getting together and we discuss love, and you have a definition of love. Well, I have a definition of love too, as it has played out with my life experience so far in my relationships and my self-development. But you also have a completely different life experience and relationships with people. And maybe you have children and I don't have children. And therefore, like, your love would be expressed towards children, which is a much more profound love, right? You have a much broader definition of what it means to really like that agape love. I don't care if my child's an axe murderer. I love him, Yeah. So your definition of love would be much different than my definition of love. but yet we would come together and we would both decide and we would have to agree upon what love is. Okay. And that is how I view truth. Now, I'm not talking about like observable truth, like oceans contain water. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, oceans are made out of bodies of water. We can both go there and say, yes, that is a body of water. That's an observable truth. That's like an interdependent kind of a truth where we know that trees breathe out oxygen and we breathe in the oxygen and let out carbon dioxide and they breathe in the carbon dioxide. And that's like an interdependence. And then there's intersubjectivity. But then there is like interbeing, right? And that is the combination of intersubjectivity and interdependence, where everything kind of has this natural ebb and flow. We rely on nature to support us, and we rely on each other to give cultural significance and to kind of determine what truth is as it pertains to society as a whole, and for our preservation as a society to continue moving forward with the least amount of suffering, imparted on each other. So that,
right.
So kind of taking that understanding and applying it to somebody that, like the two podcasters that I was working with. And then at the end of it, to have him go, so you're saying it's a necessary evil. And I was like, yeah, you're getting there. And you could see it. Like you could see the light bulb go off in his head, how this is almost needed, like the yin and the yang, like you need that sort of friction in order to determine amongst ourselves what is truthful.
This is fascinating to me, man. I mean, and especially because of my personal journey, right? I go to church with a bunch of, full dedicated Christians every Sunday. And most of the people being here in the Bible Belt are, raised Christian. So when you say, a necessary evil, right? So what is a necessary evil? Well, if we believe in the biblical God, then we know that God created the devil. And God created every single thing that is in opposition to his message. He created all of it. So in that way, it would be kind of, you could see it that way as a necessary evil as well, right? In order for Jesus to have his story, there had to be an opposing force for this story to happen in a way. So relativity in that way, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you ever stop and like consider the fact that we live on a plane of existence that demanded a savior? Like we live on a plane of existence that deemed a savior was necessary. You know what I mean? Like we have to have it because there's that much oppression and suffering and oppression. Like somebody please save us from this mess, But the Bible actually says that God is love.
Right.
Literally, that is what the Bible says, is that God is love. I believe it's in 1 John. And love is not always, what it takes to cultivate love? I mean, it takes a lot of work, right? Like to get if we look at the human experience, and I've actually now began to look at humans as more of Homo naren, which is storytelling beings, as opposed to Homo sapiens, which means more wise beings.
Get out of here. That's exactly what I've been doing. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So like we're all about the story. Like we need this story. And there's only so many stories given our emotional makeup and our sequence of events, birth and death, and the things that matter to us. There's only so many stories that can actually play out. This is why movies only have a set amount of genres. There's drama, thriller, horror, comedy. So there's only a certain amount of genres for movies, and these are all comprised of our emotional makeup. So there's only so many stories that can be told. And the only thing that has really changed over millennia after millennia is the characters, the wardrobe, the toys, and the demographics. Like that's, what I mean? And the scenery, right? So, I mean, that's really the only thing that has changed with our stories, but it's still all the same thing, right? But it almost takes that experience, that life experience, and the suffering and the friction and the cultivation to have this byproduct that we call love. And another thing that I had shared on the last podcast, I've never had this thing manipulate love. I've had it manipulate hate, anger, rage, anxiety, stress, like all the negative attributes and qualities that come, are a part of being human. But I've never been overwhelmed with this sense of love, Now there has been moments where I'll have like realizations throughout the experience, and there's like this huge release from it. And I am overwhelmed with metta, loving kindness. Like I understand the non-duality of it all. And, but then even in that moment, I want to cling to it. I want that forever. You know what I mean? I want that forever, but it's always it dissipates quickly. But so does the anger, so you're kind of in this constant clinging and aversion, like get the anger away from me and the pain, but I want more of that love, and it's really, and I think what we're doing is we're kind of finding this, this thing here where it's like a constant all the way up where we're balancing out, we're really balancing out, and we're going through the pain and the suffering. And one of the greatest byproducts of all of this suffering has been the ability to empathize with others to a degree that I never thought possible. I will say that. And love is comprised of a great deal of empathy, being able to see others as yourself and yourself as others or within others. It's the difference between, I would say that a dualistic empathy is I understand you, right? Because when I say that I understand you, there's still a separation. There's I understand you, but do I really understand you? You know what I'm saying? Whereas non-dualistic empathy says more along the lines of we are of the same understanding. There is no difference between you and I. There is only this understanding, and we are of that same exact understanding. And it's, I could say, I love you, and there is I expressing love to you. Now, whether that's reciprocated or not, I do not know. And do we have the same reciprocation of the same amount of love? I don't know. But a non-dualistic love, an agape love, says that we are of the same love. This love that exists outside of us are together within that, and in that there is no separation, between you and I, if that makes sense.
That's excellent. Yeah. And, what you were saying about parables, I've been looking at it. So the reason I laugh so hard whenever you brought it up is because I've been looking at this thing lately where I'm seeing it as a sine wave. And I see it as we dip down into suffering, and then we come back to ourselves, to our center point. We come back to ourselves, and that is our true self at that moment of how much we've learned where we are. And then we go into this is what I find myself with the experience, especially. And then I'll go into happiness, joy, and it will feel overbalanced. I'm too joyful. I become selfish. I become boisterous. I become uncaring of my, of people around me. And then I come back into center, and then I go back into, and it feels like a sine wave. And the faster that sine wave goes, the more we are staying in, the more time we're spending in the balanced part, right? In the middle. The reason the parable thing was so interesting to me is because I've been looking at the parables of Jesus and thinking about the tool that actually is, just as a basic tool of communication. And when you think about like humans before TV, before radio, before books, they could only tell stories. Before the Bible for many, many years, the Old Testament for a long, long time was just stories passed down from family member to family member, It wasn't a book because they didn't have books, But when the Bible was first, being told about, they couldn't afford to make books. People couldn't read all these things. And so when you look at the parables of Jesus, the stories that we have watched as humans all of our lives, because we're a generation certainly that was raised by our TVs. You know what I mean? We were constantly being shown story after story after story in books, TV, radio, movies. Every single thing was a story. And I see it as a Jesus parable. Why did Jesus tell parables? Two reasons, right? One, because he couldn't just tell you the answer. He needed you to experientially know it, and come to it on your own. So what I'm saying is so much information is wrapped up in this thing. Whenever I say to you, the Godfather, right? Like that's so much information that I'm conveying across just saying the Godfather. So it simplifies stories, puts them in a more digestible format. And so I think that that's why stories are such a big deal, because it's all this information where I don't have to tell you the whole story. I can just tell you the title of the story and you get it.
I totally 100% agree that a parable teaches in ways that a teaching can't. Just a regular, straightforward teaching. You know, I can try to describe like what love is, but if I tell you a story of love, you know, well, then it kind of like registers to you. And you're right about the parables in the Bible. In fact, I think it's even in the Bible that Jesus, after telling his parables, would take his disciples aside and give them the underlying message to the parables, right? Because like those deeper understandings were meant for those of, I guess, of a greater understanding, because we could both hear the same parable and it's going to mean something entirely different. And I believe, you know, they paint a picture, like imagery occurs in your head when somebody, if I tell you a story about, like there's that one by Ram Dass, I just absolutely love this story. And I think I may have told it before, you know, sometimes our desires in life change, you know, as we get older and we want different things. And he said, you know, a guy's walking through the woods and it's like a nice silent meditation. And then all of a sudden he hears, psst, yo, hey. And he's looking around. He doesn't see anybody. There's nobody around. Should be anybody around for miles. And then all of a sudden he hears it again. Psst, yo, down here. And he looks down and there's a frog. And he says, are you talking to me? And the frog says, yeah, hear me out. He said, if you give me a big kiss right on the lips, I will turn into the most beautiful woman that you've ever seen. I will cook and clean for you and I'll warm your bed every single night. I'll be the best thing that's ever come into your life. The guy thinks about it. He picks up the frogs and sticks it in his pocket and continues down the path. Well, 5 minutes later, the frog goes, psst, yo, hey. He goes, yeah, what's up? The frog says, what about that kiss? And he says, man, at my age, it's a lot cooler to have a talking frog, you know? So like those, those kinds of stories, you know, and then they come into play when we find ourselves not having the same desires as we get older. And we're getting older now. I'm 45 and I just don't have the same desires that I had when I was a kid. And then stories like that come into play and they make it okay. You know, they make it okay because there's a humor associated with it. You know, there's like this kind. Yeah. So, yeah, I see. And now you have the picture in your head of a guy kissing or, you know, and a frog talking to him and this frog wanting him to give him a kiss. And that kind of humor comes in with it and things are, you know, are okay. And so, yeah, you know, that'll come back into play when a time in your life when you notice yourself, you know, kind of not wanting to, you know, have the same sort of fun that you used to have, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, and also, I mean, for people that go through these experiences, you know, that separation from these old things that we loved when we were little kids, we both feel like this process is growing us up in a way. It's forcing us, like you said, you know, like they said to you early on that it was some sort of advanced training or whatever. What did they say it was? Like a hard training program or something like that. They said to you, and I thought in the beginning that it was an advanced or something like that. Maybe I'm mistaken.
No, they never really. I would say that the only, you know, because 99% of what the voices say is absolute bullcrap. But every now and then something is said, and it was more so in the beginning. You know, I think a lot of people's experience kind of plays out the same, where it really feels like live operators in the beginning of it, you know. And there was just another guy on the Discord the other day or on Reddit who had a very similar experience to me, where in the beginning of this, they were like, well, look who's back. Oh, it's the Kevin Orr show. What are you doing back, Kev? You know, like it was very jovial and like, you know, and they referred to me as a vestibule one time, which still kind of makes sense, you know, like if anybody doesn't know what a vestibule is, like if you go to I guess like if you have like a Wawa near you or some sort of convenience store, you open up one door and you go in and there's like a little enclosure and then you have to open up another door to go into the main store. that little area there, like it's a room between the outside and the inside. And that's what they refer to me as a vestibule. And that has remained true.
Can I pause that real quick and just let you know, man, sorry to interrupt your story. So please try to, remember what you were saying there, the vestibule, right?
Yeah.
That they were referring to you as that. So yesterday I started, yesterday or the day before, I started hearing the word vestibule. I don't use that word.
Wow.
I don't use that word. And I started hearing it a lot to the point where this morning I was going, what is it about the vestibule? So it's the in-between space. I know that, it's like the antechamber maybe, or you know what I mean? Like,
well, the only thing that makes sense to me if we can actually take the word vestibule and give it any sort of substance and say that it's truthful, which, I'm always reluctant to use the word truthful when it comes to these voices. But if we can say that it's truthful, we could say that whatever this thing is, it uses our processing of our observable world to also perceive it. Yeah. But I think what you're remembering is they said that arrested development.
That's what it was.
And I don't even think that that's on an individual level. I don't think that you personally, where I'm at now is that I believe that what we're tapped into is a mechanism that is responsible for collective arrested development. And we're in a period of time where we're not quite caught up with ourselves. Like, we have advanced. I mean, I can think I'm 45. And if I think back, 20, 25 years, nobody had a cell phone. People had, I think beepers, even when I was like a kid, Atari was just coming out. So to go from and printers and like the original computers with the green screen. So to look at what was around when I was a child and what is happening now, like the possibility of us doing this right now was inconceivable. This was some Star Trek stuff. You know what I mean? This was like way in the future. So to have the capacity for like an interconnectedness and an inter-exchangeability between ideas and thoughts and philosophies and religions and worldviews from one side of the planet to the other, like that. And to have access with the internet in all of our pockets to all sorts of esoteric information and people that are involved in all, like, there has been an explosion of collective information all just kind of coming together. And I'm sure it's creating a lot of confusion and mayhem on a different level. So like, whereas before we saw this sort of generation after generation, like this nice ebb and flow of like, because every generation thinks the generation behind it is rebellious. Idiots. And yeah, right. Well, now we're seeing this like explosiveness occurring with humanity and the sharing of ideas across the globe in a split second. At all times, people are just glued to their phones. At all times on social media. What is this person saying? What is this person? And exposing themselves. What do these people think about me? You can go on like some Reddit communities and it's like, rate me. Basically, you put your picture out there and just have people belittle you or tell you you're gorgeous. You know what I mean? So it's insane what's happening right now. But yeah, and I think that is playing into a lot of this. There's just this inter-exchange and confluence and a lot of confusion of old beliefs and adherences and cohesion. I think the cohesion is kind of coming apart. Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're tapped into to a degree.
When you look at, I agree completely. And when you look at astrology, we're moving from, the 70s song, This is the Dawning of the Age of Aquarius, that whole Age of Aquarius thing, right? So we're moving into the Age of Aquarius. And when you look at the Age of Pisces is what we're coming out of. The Age of Pisces is all about supporting the power structure, like in a way of being a republic versus a democracy. You have representatives and the power structure is in place. The hierarchy is there. And during this time, during this age of Pisces, we have had all these power structures, and even religion has been a big power structure in a lot of ways, right? And so now we're moving into the age of Aquarius. And I find it really fascinating that in the age of Aquarius, the point of it is individual expression of the self in the whole, without having some greater than others. Giving an equal balanced representation to people's individuality, and valuing each person's perspective. And then when you add all these perspectives together, then the whole is better off than having a president and and then a slave at the bottom, So everyone's perspective is appreciated. And I feel like that's what we're kind of doing too, is taking in all this information, and we're forcing ourselves to go, okay, hold on a second. I have to take all these things into account now, and then I have to discern them. I have to discern my truth. And so our truths are all kind of being smashed together as we're figuring them out because of the internet, because of technology. And I think it really is the process of evolution of, to me, like the galaxy, the universe, whatever, the source, God, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this is the evolution of God, to me, is one way to say it. But it's also the evolution of just nature. And we're in a natural process where we are making a mess and then cleaning it up over and over, getting out of frequency and then back in and then out again and back in. And through that process, we as a whole, as a collective, are growing stronger and wiser and more in line with what we actually choose to be as a whole.
I was reading, so this is, and I'll actually read it. He posted it on Facebook, so it's public. This is from somebody that I'm friends with on Facebook. And he said, I want to say something about Christianity. If you don't believe in Jesus Christ, that's your choice. But why is it so important for many of you to mock those of us that do? If we're wrong, what have we lost when we die? Nothing. How does our faith in Jesus Christ bring you any harm? You think it makes me stupid, gullible, ignorant? That's okay. How does that affect you? If you're wrong, your consequences are far worse. I would rather live my life believing in God and serving him and find out I was right, rather than not believe in him and not serve him and find out that I was wrong. Then it's too late. Ain't no shame in my game. I believe in Jesus Christ. He has been so good to me. And this is the mentality, right? And I get it because I was raised Christian. I went to Liberty. You know what I mean? Like I was there. And it's that sense of rightness. It's the sense of, and I'm not saying that they're wrong.
Right.
But if your sense of rightness within the world relies on other people being wrong, then you need to re-examine your sense of rightness within the world, because that's the conflict. That's your, you're creating division, right?
Exactly.
And again, because it comes down to, I'm right and I'm going to heaven, and all of you sinners are damned, right? And they don't realize that in order to have the saved, you got to have the damned. You don't have the saved without the damned, as Alan Watts would say, right? Like, you don't have one without the other. Like, you need the damned in order for you to be saved, and yet you're condemning the damned. Like, you guys are all going to hell. And, I very kindly responded to him. And I said, I am not currently a practicing Christian, but you are right. There is absolutely no need for diversity, mocking, or ridicule. I respect, appreciate, and love you no matter what spiritual practice you adhere to. I'm not sure what is going on right now with all the hatred. In my town last week, there was Christian protesters out front of a mosque holding signs that read, America is Christian country. So it's not just Christians. There's just an overall state of fear and confusion that appears to be amplified right now. And that's a true story. We have a mosque in our town. And they were having a food drive. It was like, whatever kind of food for whatever diversity, it's like very diverse food. And we had Christian protesters out there holding up signs, not in our town, Christian, America's God country. Right. And, I was like blown away. And there's a quote by, and a lot of this really does come down to this one quote. And I actually posted it in the Discord community, but there's a quote by Rainn Wilson. You know who Rainn Wilson is?
Yes.
The guy from The
From
Office.
The Office.
That played Dwight. So his quote is, "The metamorphosis of Jesus Christ from a humble servant of the abject poor to a symbol that stands for gun rights, prosperity theology, anti-science, limited government that neglects the destitute, and fierce nationalism is truly the strangest transformation in human history." And he's right. You know what I mean? Like, he's totally dead on point with that statement. If you look at what Jesus did, what he actually rejected, right? And what he stood for, it is not in alignment with what it's being used for right now. You know, this separation that we're seeing between people, this right versus wrong, you know?
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with my best friend about this right before we hit record here. And he says, he is a lifelong Christian, and he's a beautiful soul, because whenever I mention, anything about faith, faith is his core tenet. You know what I mean? Like, it's unshakable with him, and I love that. I think it's beautiful, right? His Christian faith is unshakable, but what's wonderful is here I am in this church and hanging out with with people who are devout Christians, and they're saying, I believe this way, and I'm going, well, I can accept you and hang out with you even if I don't believe exactly that way. Can you do the same with me?
Right.
Right. And that's really the key, I think, is there are, and what my friend said today was very important. Let's make sure that we don't lump everybody in ever. Right. And what we were just talking about with the age of Aquarius, looking at the individual, discerning, not based on broad judgments anymore, discerning the individual moment, discerning the individual person, discerning the individual situation. That is when we find truth and where we find love and gratitude for each other. Because most of the people, I share my videos openly with my family and friends. I put them on Facebook, and so everybody that I go to church with, that they probably know I don't believe exactly the same as they do, but they want me in there. They want me playing in the band. They want me in there. And I think that as long as they can look at me and say, he doesn't believe like us, but boy, he just loves hanging out with us. And so we're not going to judge him. And we're not going to judge them if he goes and starts his own thing. And if I ended up having my own church, and me and my little brother both had our churches, hopefully we could be the types of churches that go, okay, well, I have my beliefs, but that doesn't stop, it doesn't stop us from getting along with a mosque and a church situation. These two entities can coexist, and then they don't have to fight. In the history of, some people would look at it and say in the history of the Crusades and the Salem witch trials and all this stuff, you might say, well, his Christianity has a history of blah, blah, blah. Well, I think that we need to get rid of those histories and those assumptions and those lumping in those general broad statements and go, well, wait a minute. What about this Christian? What about this non-Christian, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, let's look at, if we can, for a few minutes here, let's look at the antagonist. Okay. Because there was a comment on the last YouTube video that I did where the person had said to me, I guess she misinterpreted something I had said during the video. And she said, I'm sorry to see that you're not a believer in Christ anymore. Right. And, and this was my response to her. I'll actually read it off of her. She said, she was thankful for the video, but I said, I think that it's important to clarify that the statement, I'm not a believer, isn't necessarily correct. I just see it differently now, all of it. What we face is experienced by a vast amount of people spread all over the planet from a wide variety of backgrounds. This phenomenon does not discriminate. Your age, race, location, affluence, occupation, and religious background means nothing to it. It will still carry on and exact its measure in the same way regardless, and it will respond to whatever a person's personal beliefs towards it are. So saying you're wrong or you're right when we're all up against the same thing creates division and doesn't make any sense to me. If anything at all could be said, it is that the phenomena itself serves as an antagonist, giving you, the protagonist, deeper conviction towards what you perceive as being truth. But that goes for everyone, regardless of what they perceive as being existentially and spiritually truthful. So, we're all fighting over what's truth. What is truthful? Who's right and who's wrong? And yet we all have the same antagonist that doesn't give a shit what we what we say, what we believe in, what we say. It doesn't care. It's opposition. At its core, we could say that Satan is opposition. And it doesn't matter what you're believing in, it's going to oppose it to give it grounding, to give it solidity, right? To solidify it and to give it some substance. Because without the opposition, it has no substance. It has no need to exist whatsoever. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, because the relative thing that we're talking about, everything's relative to something else. That's how it has its definition and all that, right?
Exactly. So if you don't have something, or if you have something that doesn't withstand the test of time and pressure, then it's not worth holding on to. And it doesn't matter what you believe, it's going to be tested and it's going to be put into a pressure cooker, and you're going to have to deal with that over and over and over and over again.
Couldn't it be said that God is also a force that exacts its plan regardless of human suffering or not? Because when you think about, is it the story? I always get Job and Jonah confused, but the one where God said, you know what, my best subject, I'm going to go ahead and torture him to the brink of possibility. Yeah. And I'll show you, devil, that he'll still be with me. And so a God that would do that to his best subject doesn't care as much about human suffering, because when we see the way this world works, like you said, there is suffering. Right. And so a God that would make suffering, there's a little bit of uncaring for the populace in a way, right? Right.
Well, I mean, even the very act of coming into the world, right? Like, we're conceived in pleasure and we're birthed in a massive amount of pain. So it's like right then and there, right there, you have the duality, right? We're conceived in orgasmic, wonder, and but then we're given birth in excruciating pain, which is then immediately followed by beauty and purity, right? So you have the two, and then a new start. So that right there is very symbolic of the human story in itself.
Right. Oh, hold on. Someone's knocking on my door. Hold on 1 sec. So sorry about that. I had to. My neighbor brought me a cake.
What?
Yeah.
How awesome is that?
My neighbor brought me a cake.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
She brings me food all the time. She's just like, hey, here's some food. And she just knocks on my door and says, here, food. And I'm like, okay.
That's great.
What were we talking about? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't. I got sidetracked by the cake.
When we look at how this world is shaped, and we look at the TI experience, the experiencer experience, whatever, there are a lot of people who are isolated. And if you have community who can help you talk about the thing that you're going through, help you understand, give you perspective to see the thing, give you relativity to see the thing that you're talking about, that you're going through, then it helps so much. And one of the issues that we run into now is the reason that I feel so attached to my church is because of community, and how that might be the biggest thing that we're missing in this world. For a long time here in the United States, the church was the community. That's where everybody went to communicate with each other. And so if you weren't a Christian, you were left out of a lot of community, because especially here in Oklahoma, that's how you get your community. If you're not at church hanging out with people, then maybe you see them at the football game. But at the football game, you usually, you're not what do they call fellowship as much, right? And so I really think that it's such a big deal to be able to have community spaces that aren't locked in saying this has to be, you have to believe in this guy, versus that one, or we can't hang out. And I think that kind of goes back to the lot of the law of one kind of thing, and being able to look at each other and say we're all one thing, and we really are when you look at it as a collective, a collective consciousness. We really are, and so I hope that we can start to find ways to have community representation, because when you look at also this is part of my point. People are protesting outside this mosque in your community, in your neighborhood. And it's like when I was a kid and I hated gay people, and I didn't hate black people, but I didn't get them and I didn't care to, kind of, but then once I started hanging out with them, it changed everything. So when you spend time around people that are unlike you, then it helps both of you grow. And one thing that I'm really looking at this is people like us that are seen as, off their rocker or something like that. It's like, I hope that people can also afford that same sense of community to us, to people who are going through weird experiences, to say, hey, that guy is spouting some weird stuff, but I want him in my community because I trust his instincts. I trust his heart, And so I think that would be a big helpful thing for us to be able to say, really come together in that kind of way.
A lot of what you, and I'm trying to find the video so I can hold it up. But if I can't, I'm sure just me explaining it will create an appropriate picture. I thought I had sent Rebecca the link the other day. But anyway, it was a video taken and I've actually been a witness to this. So I've been to Haiti twice in my life. And we were in a town called Port-au-Piemonte, which was like, it was pretty deep. It was pretty deep in the Haitian country. So we had to go into Port-au-Prince and then take a puddle jumper plane into Cayes. And then from Cayes, we had to drive this long road that was only half paved all the way to Port-au-Piemonte. And there are places in Haiti where when the children see white people, they start crying because they've never seen white people before. And the children were coming up to me and trying to peel the tattoos off of my skin.
Wow.
Right? Because they were fear. It's just fear of
the unknown.
Not of the unknown. Of fear of, I don't know. And I think we all have that in us, especially me, 45. I grew up in a predominantly middle-class white American neighborhood outside of Philadelphia. And so there just wasn't that culturally diverse exposure. And, so my roots were a comfort zone it was like a Caucasian comfort zone, not my fault, not my parents' fault. It's just the way that development is occurring. But where I live now, which is awesome, has been great for me. The neighbor behind me is African. The woman beside me is, I want to say she's Puerto Rican. The people over here are Mexican. The couple underneath of me is a young Christian couple. The girl above me is this girl that's always playing music crazy all the time. And then there's like this old hippie guy that lives down below me. And then behind me off to the right is, I want to say they're maybe Dominican. So it's a very culturally diverse community, and everybody just sort of gets along and helps each other out and blows each other's leaves and takes out each other's trash and gets each other's groceries and, hey, how are you? And it's been wonderful. It's been very opening for me. And a lot of other things in my life, obviously, up until this point. But I think that within all of us is a little bit of racism, that's entirely rooted in comfort and fear, right? And ignorance. There's a lot of, we just don't understand certain things and cultural beliefs. And a lot of that's kind of, it's coming together, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful to see. But there needs to be acceptance. There needs to be an acceptance of, I accept you no matter where you've come from or what you do. And because, my neighbor in the back, the African guy, I could tell, he didn't have much growing up because everything on his back, our backyard is very clean. The grass is mowed. Our stuff is organized. We're kind of minimalist. He has 20 bicycles out there. 20 bicycles and like a bunch of beds all lined up and like just crap all over the place. Like he's a hoarder of stuff because he probably came from somewhere where he didn't have a lot of stuff. His car, you know what I mean? Like his cars are like older and he's always out there trying to fix them and work when he doesn't have much, so to him, his stuff means a lot to him. He's in a country where he can have a lot of stuff.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So there has to be an acceptance. Like I have no right to go over there and say, hey, clean up your shit. We don't put up with that crap here. Go back to Africa. You're going to hoard like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, It's just terrible. He's like the first person to come over and rake our leaves. He's a great neighbor. Like the guy's fantastic. His kids are awesome. He's outside playing with like, you just have to, there has to be a level of understanding and acceptance and appreciation is all I'm saying.
Well, let's finish it up with this if we can. Let's finish it up with this thought. Community, you were just talking about how your community is so wonderful, and my neighbor just brought me a chocolate cake while we were talking, so I had to interrupt it to get up. So, yeah, I mean, community is pretty important, right?
Yeah.